Alright, sweet. Hello, welcome to day 2, 3 for some. We're all a bit hungover. Let's just get this out of the way. Welcome to the Filmmaking panel. Let's start as ever by telling us who you are. Let's start with Will. We'll work down the line.
Hi, I'm Will McDaniel. I make fleshy videos, I suppose you'd say.
And also puppet videos. Right?
Puppet, yeah. 2 seconds. Videos with me talking to fleshy puppets, I suppose.
Hello, I'm PJ Liguori, and I do videos, like storytelling videos and stuff like that. And I use cardboard and stuff.
Please state the medium with which you've got squishy puppets, cardboard. Hazel, what do you make films with?
Camera. Mostly comedy and horror. Jack.
Hello, my name is Jack Howard, and I'm in a comedy duo with my good friend and occasional lover Dean Dobbs. And we make stupid videos together and try and make them look like movies to convince people that it's worth their time.
I'm Elle, and I do videos about my life and my friends and my family.
That's nice. I'm Simon Paul, writer, director, do a bit of music videos, a bit of short films. Whatever I fancy. Cool, alright, sweet. So I'm very pro. I'm gonna read the questions off my phone, just because, you know, it's just a Sunday, you know. Let's chat. So, the first thing, this is a very bright light. Yeah, I can see it when I blink. First question I kind of want to ask is, do you guys find it harder to start a project or to finish a project? What daunts you more?
I will say the start daunts me a lot more than the finish. Like as soon as I've started, like it's almost like a snowball effect, and I can't help but finish it. But the beginning, and almost like that first hurdle of like, what even is this? Is sometimes the hardest thing. Every now and again, you'll get these lightning in a bottle moments where it's like, oh my god, this just works. And I had one of those coincidentally like the other day when Dean and I were writing a new sketch, and it was like that first hurdle was tiny and it just worked. But a lot of the time that first page and that first process and that first draft is the hardest thing for me in the world, and makes me sometimes hate doing this. I sometimes just go, I wish I didn't have to do this process, because it sometimes just hurts me.
Aww.
Thank you. One person.
Yeah, just sympathy that deserved.
I agree with Jack. I think starting can be a little bit more difficult for the reasons he stated. And I think when you're finishing a project, there's still going to be a number of problems, and you're going to face things, probably different problems to the ones that at the start of the project. But it's maybe a bit more clear how to solve those problems, because you know what you've got in front of you. Like if you're in an edit, you know what you're working with. Maybe you need to do some pickups, okay, fair enough. Maybe you need to, rejig the whole scene and move some clips around and change maybe how the scene's feeling. Okay, you know how to solve that problem. But at the start, like Jack said, like sometimes it's just like, what is it gonna be? I don't know. So that can be daunting, yeah.
Do you have a different thing, or
Well, I'm just curious, because I think I find with filmmaking, when it's not going well, it's sort of hellish to start and hellish to finish, and there's like a day where it goes right and you're like, this is amazing, and then you're just, there's a great quote I really like, which is just, writing's easy, you just sit down at the typewriter and bleed. And it's just like, I do sometimes into the typewriter. No,
not really, Will.
And Will actually does do that for real, which is
I'm writing it down.
Well, I guess it's just, I think those tend to be the biggest hurdles, right? Like it's like getting that ball rolling in a way can be a really tough thing, but then I think the flip side of that is sometimes you get people who like have a million ideas and kind of start writing something but don't quite finish that script. Like, have any of you had experience with that where like you've gotten a certain way down with something but it never quite came to fruition?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Tell me more.
Have you finished everything you've ever started?
Yeah, I think so.
Please tell us your ways, and also the way that you're holding that microphone is ingenious.
It was a big night for Elle.
No, I just think I'm just like too lazy to come up with another idea, so just finish it. I figure out how to fix it and then just go through with it. And usually by the time I regret the idea, I spent too much money on it, so I just do it.
Yeah, I've got ideas like that I've told people about or had in my head for years now that I haven't done anything with or figured out how to make it work, or like who the main character should be, or what it should be about, or what like it's really about. Because stories are about one thing, but really they're about like other things. And I've never been able to figure all those questions out, and that can get you really bogged down. So what I find is best to do is literally just put that idea in the drawer and do a different thing, because I think that like you can spend too much time like stressing over it to the point where it won't make sense to you anymore.
Hit your first draft of something and it's like, and then you like give it a week. I mean, that's my writing process.
That's what the film was.
Right. Long fart. And then to me, it's always like, right, go back to it now, see it afresh, like get on it with new eyes. But I was going to ask, what do you think certain, I don't know, and I say this hopefully in a way that is useful, but what kind of common mistakes do you guys feel a lot of people make starting up, mistakes you've made that you've kind of had to learn from that would be useful hopefully as a learned moment? All right, none.
all right. I'm kind of just jumping off what you just said about like not finishing stuff. I think that a lot of people make the mistake where they go, oh, I've got this really good idea and I'm going to save it until I've made a few more things, and then I'll make that one, because that one is my masterpiece. And I think that's such a good idea that I'll make it when I've got more experience. And I think that's the worst thing you can do, because by the time you are 2 or 3, 4 years down the line, that idea might not mean anything to you anymore, and there's a thing you've never made, or you won't be able to think of another thing to do before that. So I think that whatever capabilities you've got to make anything, you should just make something, because it's always better to make something than to make nothing.
I agree. Yeah, I've got so many of those ideas. I've got like folders and folders of like finished scripts that I've just never even tried writing. And you go back to them now, and there's, like you were saying, you can take bits out of them, but mostly they're just completely redundant because you've just moved past them. So I just agree. Yeah, I agree.
But I also think there's a lesson in that though, that you spend time writing.
Sure, yeah.
So it's not like you weren't doing anything, but it's like some people just go, I've got this concept that's so good I can't even fathom trying it yet. Yeah. I have to do other things before I do that. Yeah. And I think that you obviously were writing scripts, and that's a good thing.
Yeah. I think one mistake maybe a lot of people make that I definitely used to make was thinking that anything is ever truly finished. Like you can finish a film, finish your project, and that's great, and then you move on to the next one, and you should keep going. But just because it's finished doesn't mean it was perfect. I think it's important to reflect on what you've made and really try to almost tear it apart a little bit yourself and think like, okay, what went well, what didn't go well, and really have that moment to sort of debrief yourself before you move on to the next project. It doesn't have to be straight away, but as long as you revisit it at some point. Because I remember I used to make stuff, say, finished, move on, and never really look back at it. And then eventually, years later, when I would look back at it, just out of curiosity, like, how is this old thing I made in 2013? I'd look at it and think, oh, wow, that's pretty rough. At the time, I thought, this is amazing. But it's important to look back at your old stuff and never, it's never truly finished.
Not in a George Lucas way, though.
No. That's too far. You don't need to go back and change stuff. Just learn from what you've done.
You hear that? Georgie's at the back.
Yeah, I think I saw him.
I'll take that advice on. Very cool. So have you ever had a bit of filmmaking advice that's really stuck with you, and is something that's just like either a sentence or like a notion or something to do that is like a real go-to to you that you kind of go back to a lot?
Yeah, so I was talking to my friend Steven Spielberg, which is true. He's not my friend.
Half true, yeah.
I was talking to him.
You were talking
and he said,
so just drop that.
just if you could thanks. He said, I could just hear it. He's never happy with anything he makes. Steven fucking Spielberg. I was actually,
Made Jurassic Park and Schindler's List in the same year.
But like he said in a way that like he's exactly what you were saying, so you're quite like my friend Stephen.
I like to think so.
I
don't want to say it.
We're all thinking.
But yeah, he was like, the day I think something's perfect is the day I stop telling stories. Like it's always just it's just striving to be better. It's just striving to be a better storyteller and a better filmmaker. And the day I make a film and go, well, that's the one, it's absolutely perfect, is I'll just stop, because I'm not trying to get better anymore. So yeah, I think that was, just really fucking heartening to hear as well. Sorry, Sorry. Stop cursing on panels.
It does make you wonder though, when you watch a film that you just think, oh, that was amazing. Like for example, like Get Out. Like, do you think Jordan Peele like sat back and thought, all right, let's look at the problems? Because it's a film where I don't see any problems. So like, it must have something.
Yeah.
Like that didn't go how I wanted it to go.
Yeah, definitely. And it's interesting actually, I think, to have that disconnect as like an audience who watches the original Star Wars and goes, this is amazing. And George Lucas goes, no, I wish I could have done this with it. And that's one of the most famous cases of all time, that like it didn't go how he wanted it to and it accidentally became something iconic. And he went back and changed it. Everyone went, nope, this is worse than what you did before. So sometimes I think it's good to have limitations. Yeah. This is sort of a different thing. It's not advice that I've had, but something I've learned, that when you intentionally sometimes put yourself in a box with your ideas, you can come out with something better because you're giving yourself limitations. Like now, if you look at movies that have no limitations because of CGI, you can see the most spectacular things and be less wowed by them than older movies that had limitations with what they could achieve.
It was the classic case with Jaws, coming back to my friend Stephen. They couldn't afford a decent shark. They just had this sort of half limp, half shark that looked really crap. So they had to just be really clever about how they shot it, the type of lighting, keeping it quite dark, not really showing it. And then of course the one
and using
John Williams score.
using other elements.
So they used the score to kind of to like create that tension, because the shark itself looked kind of crap. So like,
imagine if that film was made today though.
It'd just be a big CGI.
It'd just be a big CGI shot.
The Meg, wouldn't it?
It'd be the Meg.
Not to shit on the Meg, I'm sorry.
Shit on Meg.
The director with the Megs at the back. Next to
George, is he there?
Another piece of advice wasn't something specifically for me, but something I really connected with recently. There's a podcast called Script Notes that I try to listen to occasionally, which is all about screenwriting. And the guy on it wrote the new show Chernobyl, which is amazing, obviously. And he does a whole episode called How to Write a Movie, which people like me go, oh my god, it's the trick. Oh, here we go, we can find out how you do it. And I've watched and listened to and read so many things about like the formula of screenwriting and like the 3-act structure and like the arc of it and all that sort of stuff, how to do that. And his whole podcast was like, yeah, but why is it that structure? Why do we respond to that sort of stuff? And I really responded to that advice, and I think that if you are interested at all in writing and storytelling, I would really listen to that. Again, it's called Script Notes, and the episode is called How to Write a Movie. It's something that it almost opened my eyes to a different way of looking at writing, that I feel like I'd hit a wall recently, and that really sort of like led me to a different conclusion about how I think about it. So I'd really recommend that.
A piece of advice I really like, very, very practical piece of advice, was I was once told that, again, I'm going to do a name drop as well, you've set the ball. I got to meet Mr. Ron Howard, obviously, with the new film stuff, and a really cool bit of advice he gave was, often if he's thinking about a scene he wants to direct, he'll go to a movie he just adores, he goes to a movie he loves, and tries to find a similar scene, and watches it silently, watches it without any audio. And he said, what's interesting is you start to get a feel for what their shot list was that day. You start to get a feel for, okay, so they're going for the wide, and then, they hold off on the close until this line, right, what's that line? And kind of piecing that together. And I think it kind of, in a funny way, it kind of takes the magic away from it, but in a really useful way, because suddenly you're in a position where you're like, ooh, I can kind of dissect that a little bit. I can kind of steal that. So I always think that's a really good example, weird example. When we were doing Guiltless, the latest Dodie music video, there's this bit where she's like falling in the darkness, and the very, very, very strong influence on that was the scene in Get Out where he falls into the sunken place, because it's one of the fucking coolest scenes in the world. And we really were just like, let's look at it really practically, and you realise they actually have him sink down in his first location, and then they match cut that onto him falling, and it was just a very practical way of being like, that's helpful, cool, that's how we're going to do that, and it's just steal, but silently. Elle, I wanted to come to you on this one. So you used to do, I'm baiting you out here, a lot of fan edits of stuff, didn't you, right?
Yeah, I did.
And that's how you started off on YouTube.
Yeah, it was.
And what's so funny to me is I think the thing that makes your videos sing for me is very much the edit. And I can tell that you've got a background and an experience in editing. What is it for you that you look for in an edit? What is it for you that you kind of you do so well to go, right, that's what's going to sing, that's what's going to work for me?
I mean, I feel like in my edits, like I heavily rely on the music, and I edit to the beat a lot, and I find that it helps with the flow, and it's like keeps it going, and I like love transitions and stuff, just so it feels like it's all like flowing together really well, and so that's like my one thing that I spend a lot of time on, because I feel like subconsciously you're like, oh, this is really, like there's a rhythm to it, and I like that rhythm.
And do you like, when you shoot stuff, do you shoot with the edit in mind? Or?
I have the music already down.
Interesting.
Yeah, the music's done first, and then I put on top. Like I start filming.
Storyboard.
Not well.
Like in Crudy, do you know roughly like?
Yes, I know in my head, and I like have it like kind of like blocked and marked in like my edit. Yeah.
Do you know how you're going to cut it even when you're filming it?
Yes.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, that's, I mean, you can
That's
tell.
why that's why I find it very hard to like I use copyrighted music because I tried to do the other way where I had someone like kind of like score it, I guess, and it didn't work because I heavily rely on the music and all that to start the project. I usually have a song. I'm like, oh, I'm gonna make a whole video revolving that this song is in it. And so.
I'm sort of similar, but I don't use copyrighted music. So when I get, to no, you don't be like that. So when I get to the edit, sometimes I forget that music can really help, like amplify stuff, and so I can sometimes cut things too quickly or lose something that would be more effective if there was music in place. And then when I get to the scoring stage, and I always use the same composer, we always end up shifting the edit slightly so that he has more room to do stuff, because I end up just like removing more like emotional moments for him to play with, or funny moments that he could like amplify. Same exact problem. I just can't imagine it for some reason.
Yeah.
A really lame thing I do is if I'm like writing and I'm a little bit stuck and it's not quite as poignant as I'd like it to be, or it's not quite kind of registering as much as I like to be, I'll just put on some music and write to the music, because then suddenly everything's like, this is amazing! I'm creating all these
I
emotions.
find that makes me write the most schmaltzy crap.
This is what I was going to say. This is a two-step bit of advice, okay? Because that's great for getting the juices flowing and like, I'm a fucking genius, and you put it all out. And of course, it's just the music that's doing it. And then like, give it a week. Come back, sit in fucking silence, and let the like sound of the words stand by themselves. And so often it's like, no.
But it's good to get words on page, because when you're staring at a blank page, that's
Right.
a lot harder than when you're staring at a page with actual words on. Even if they're not the best words, you can make them better words.
No, absolutely.
I think another bit, sorry, just to go back to advice, just because PG just made me think of it, is that when you're writing something, don't tell yourself that you have to write it in order, which is something I still struggle with. That like, when you're writing something, and at the moment I'm writing something that has to be 30 pages, so if you sat me down with a sketch idea and said it has to be 5 pages, I'll do it in half an hour. Like, it's like I've been doing it for so long now that I know how that works. But now, moving on to 30 pages, I'm like, okay, I want a scene like this, but I need to do this scene first. But I'm like, nope, now I can open up a new document and just write that scene on its own, and then I've written something, rather than just keeping it in my head and being like, I really want to write that scene, how do I get to it? Just write it. You don't need to do it in order. Like, don't trick yourself into thinking that's what you need to do. And that's for me as well, I'm telling myself that.
I was going to ask, I mean, obviously it's going to vary from project to project, but generally speaking, when you first start putting words on the page, like at the point at which literal letters are appearing on the screen, how much do you tend to have it in your head already? Do you know, like, do you prefer just jumping in and going with it, or do you prefer sort of knowing exactly what structure you're after, what the punchline is, what the ending is, you know, what stage are you at in your head generally when you start writing? Let's start with Will.
I never have an ending.
Okay.
I always start with like the concept and then build it as I go through the script. So I literally never know where it's going to go, and then it just comes out.
You've never started anything knowing the ending?
Maybe a couple, but mostly it's just kind of
I think you feel that in your writing, right? Because it's that chaotic level of just like. I think you just get bored and you're like, let's make it weirder.
Taika Waititi said that like when he gets to a point where he's like, this scene is boring.
Sorry, Hazel, you just dropped another.
I didn't say I spoke to Taika. He said that. I tried that time to not. Yeah, he was like, when you get to a bit and you're like, I'm bored of this scene now, you just change the scene. Because I was trying to get advice out. I was like, how do you write scripts? They're so great. And he was like, when I get bored, I'll just change the scene. And I was like, okay, I'll try that, I guess. But I can't imagine not knowing where you're going.
Does it ever scare you to sort of sit down and not know how it's going to end?
Well, no, I think that's why I've got so many unfinished scripts. Yeah.
How about you?
I can actually be very similar, to be honest. Not for everything, but for some things, I'll have a nugget of an idea, and I'll be like, well, I'll think of how it will end later. So I just start kind of like snowballing it into something, and sometimes it's important to know what the ending is if it's a specific kind of story you're trying to tell. But sometimes I can relate.
It's I think as well knowing, like, I've had a couple projects now where I've had to get from A to B. And so what I've done is I've made the beginning and the end and then filled it in. Like when we shot Prank Me, it's about a YouTube prankster kind of going down a dark route. So you have to start with this guy who's reasonably likable and end up with a complete psychopath. And it really helped actually that we shot the last episode first. So I knew where he was going. I knew what level of psychopathy we had to get to. So then it was a case of, okay, well in episode 5 he needs to be at here on the scale, and I would constantly talk to Corey, who played the character, about like, today we're shooting this thing and this falls in episode 7 and that means you need to be here on the scale, and we would constantly talk about where he was at, which was really helpful. And then similarly, like doing the book, I've written a book, I'm not sure if I mentioned, I've written a book, you can pre-order it now, Out of Love on there.com. But that's in reverse completely. So it begins with a couple breaking up and ends with them meeting and getting together. So I had to do the first chapter, which is technically the last chapter, and the last chapter, which is technically the first chapter, and then tell the story in between, because otherwise I didn't know, like, to what level do they hate each other and what level are they in love before you kind of do all the, because you don't want to get to almost to the last chapter and they're wildly in love already and you're like, oh, they've got to be more in love by the last one. So so sometimes it can really help if you do have an ending in mind. If it has to be that, then it's good to have something in mind where you have A to B and you know how to get there.
It's very smart, actually. Sorry, Jack, I'll let you for a second. It's a very smart way to do it, because sometimes you'll be watching something and you'll think, like, there will be like a big jump in, like, there'll be one scene where characters are one way and the next scene they're actually quite different, and you're like, oh, that was quite a jump, and we haven't really had enough time to...
And Game of Thrones.
What? Who said that?
I call it killing younglings.
Yeah.
I'll explain.
Kill your dark... Wait.
No,
Darlings is
killing younglings. No, it's very different.
Is that a Star Wars?
It is a Star Wars thing. In the prequels, which we usually don't mention, Anakin goes from being an alright, quite troubled guy to just killing a bunch of baby Jedi. And it's, look, we all know the prequels are bad, but like, I always use killing younglings as a reference.
He's right
like,
there, Hayley.
Sorry, they were crap. But yeah, that's the thing I always use when I'm in a script and I go from this state to this state and then go, wait, hold on, has my character just killed some younglings there? Like, have I gone way too far, too fast? And do I need, sometimes you just need a little bit of sort of tissue in the middle, sort of to just bridge the gap.
That'd be a great screenwriting term. Don't kill the younglings.
You can't kill the younglings, you've just got to build to it.
Yeah.
You need to know why you're killing the younglings.
I kind of the opposite to Will, actually. And I guess PJ as well, is that, like, I find that having an ending in mind, for me personally, when I'm writing it, sort of ties the whole thing together. Because when I'm writing, I then know what I almost picture it as a funnel constantly, that, like, we're heading towards a singular idea. So, like, just as an example, when we made The Goblin, which is one of our most ridiculous sketches, where Dean plays a goblin, I was like, this needs to be grounded in some sort of reality. And so, actually, it wasn't made for about 4 or 5 months, maybe longer, since we came up with the idea. Because when we were filming, we made another sketch a couple of years ago where Dean's breaking up with his computer, who's now self-aware. And on the lunch break for that sketch, Dean just started doing that little lips voice, started just doing it. And I just started improvising with him. And then over time, we started, like, coming up with the idea about, okay, so it's Jack's in a new house, and he brings his landlord over to be, like, complaining that there's a goblin in the house now. And they were like, no, that doesn't quite work, because where's it going constantly? What's he trying to do? Like, otherwise it's just a sketch of somebody complaining about having an infestation. So then it was like, oh no, Jack should be an estate agent trying to sell the house. So constantly he's got a goal. He's trying to just convince them that this is a good thing. You should try and keep this here. It's like just developing that idea from something that was just a silly idea of a silly character into okay, what's it about though? And then by the end, it was like, okay, we can then reverse it, and Dean could be the estate agent as a goblin, and like, it was just like a perfect punchline. So it was just over that time I needed to, before I ever put words on a page, I needed to figure out what it was really about before it was just like Dean doing a voice for a bit, because I would have been bored by that.
Well, because endings are hard. Like, endings, I think, are the hardest thing. And, like, I almost, for me, like, I feel like it's cheating, but it's not at all. Like, I try to do the ending first. Like, if anything, I'm like, what could the end scene be? What situation could we end up in? What's going to take us there? You know what I mean? And it's like, I find it so, because I think the way we experience a film is obviously chronologically, and I find, like, whilst, you know, clearly that's some people's kind of preference to kind of write that way, I always find it so hard because it's, you know, like, in an ideal world, like, there's a great quote, like, I think it's a David Mamet quote, which is, endings should be surprising but inevitable, which I really like. And I think that's, for me, that's so hard to construct if I don't know where that's going. But I guess that's testament to just like